Super excited to announce the Law Firm Retreat Design Your Future being held this August 5th through 8th, 2026 in the Denver, Colorado area. Teaming up with law firm architects, Power Strategy Group, we're going to be having an amazing opportunity for up to 15 firms to work on the business, not in the business. Find out more at powerstrategygroup.com.
I think one of them, and probably the biggest, is not using the data to run their business. I think that is the biggest. Teaching and showing that when you remove some of the complexity, when you integrate the systems together, when you bring that together and you can start running your business based on data instead of just having the data, it's unbelievable what some of our customers and people we've talked to have been able to do. But I would tell you that very, very many of the firms that we speak to, their bug is their data is not being used to run their business. Their data is being used to run a case.
Welcome back, everyone. It's your host, Ruby Powers with Power Up Your Practice, and we have Matt Lautz who is the founder and CEO of Neostella, a global expert in hyper automation and systematic scaling. Hyper automation, systematic scaling, that sounds like what we all need. So I'm excited to have him. I saw him speaking at TLTF last fall in Austin, and I think we've crossed paths a few times at conferences or things like that. But welcome to the show, Matt. Great to have you.
Thanks for having me, Ruby.
So I see here that you started Neostella in 2019, which is not that long ago, but it sounds like you've been up to a lot. You've been up to a lot since then. Tell us a little bit more what Neostella is, and give us a little bit a walkthrough of what you're up to.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it's been a great few-year journey. So I started Neostella after having a great run in a different industry as an implementation partner, and saw this great opportunity to help businesses with really approaching automation from a practical perspective. Practical perspective of how do we take manual processes and use cases within a business that you can really automate, but more importantly, automate and drive true return and value. Because just because something can be automated doesn't mean you're going to get the value from it that makes sense to do it. And so we quickly became a big partner with a large automation product. And in that process, helped hundreds of businesses and grew to a few hundred team members in 3 countries, and saw the opportunity that we started working with a law firm. And it wasn't necessarily the industry we were going into. We worked with manufacturing firms, a variety of industries that taught us how to look at the problem, not necessarily from an industry perspective, but just from a process. And after working with 1 or 2 firms that were scaling pretty fast as law firms, we realized that there was a huge opportunity in legal. So about 3 years ago, we pivoted our business to be completely focused on legal. And over that time, we worked with about just over 600 law firms, mostly personal injury, mass torting, veterans affair, mostly mid-sized to larger firms. And what we do is we provide an automation framework to help bring those automations from a very specific legal perspective. And then recently, we released a full case management system that brings together workflow automations and case management into one platform.
You know, somebody asked me on a podcast today, I was getting asked, they said, if you had a magic wand and you could fix something in your firm, you can't fix external things like, what's going on in the world or whatever, but what would you use it? And I said, well, you know what? It's the process between the technology and the SOPs and the constantly changing them between, the tech gets better and then we have to change the SOPs and we have the human training and the going back and forth. I feel like we're spending so much time on that. And no one had ever asked me that question, but I sort of feel like that's what your company does, is like improving, evaluating. I don't know. I don't know. I feel like that's such a huge pain point. I'm sure that's like an aspect of it, but like that's something that we're trying to practice law, but then we got all this like, what are all the features of our tech stack and how do we tell our team to keep improving or how to use the programs better? Anyway, that's a lot of what we have to deal with.
It's a huge part, Ruby, and it's a huge part for a few reasons. One is because change management is hard. A lot of people don't like to talk about the fact that change management and retraining team members and keeping motivation with change, it's not simple. And it's sometimes glossed over as an important part of the adoption of any technology within a business. And one area of how we really try to help with that is that bringing the workflow and truly having a workflow engine and a workflow system as part of our products, where we can help companies systemically manage that instead of it being just sending out new Word documents or others, SOPs, but actually make it part of the system so that when something changes, the system can help guide the user to what to do. It can help direct them where to go instead of it being, oh, shoot, did I get the latest update in the SOP doc? Did I read it? Do I remember it? It's about bringing change management to being something that isn't a bad thing, but it's something that you have to acknowledge. It has to be part of your process. It has to be part of when you implement technology and new processes. It should be part of it, not something you do along with it. It should all be together.
So one of the things I heard you when you did your speech at TLTF was use the concept of walled gardens in legal tech, and I I've been noticing sort of a theme where there's some programs out there are open API, connect with everything type of thing, and then some that are sort of, I guess, what is the definition of walled garden that you're referring to when you were talking about your presentation?
No, great question. And that was a lot of fun at TLTF. So thank you for coming to that. Is
Yeah.
we, I have a fundamental belief that a customer's data is a customer's data, and a customer should be able to use that data how they want in their business. It's their data. And I think the one area that we've seen in legal technology is that there are some products who make it difficult for a firm or for a lawyer or for, anybody within the organization to always have the access to the data for integration, for being able to back it up how they want, to make sure that they always have access to the data to how they want to use it. And we see that through certain products deciding which other companies can integrate and making decisions of which products you as a firm should be using. And why it was so intriguing to me is that I didn't come from being a lawyer. I didn't come from running a law firm. I came from building large organizations and large businesses and some other verticals, specifically in implementation and software deployment and software development. And what we saw in that process is that the legal industry is one of the most walled off in that area. And what it does is it creates the inability for a firm to make the decision of what's best for them to use. Because what's best for your firm to use might be different than what's best for the next firm to use, because how you operate, what your SOPs are, what the outcomes are you're looking for might be different. And there isn't always one answer that solves it for everybody. And it should be your decision. And so that was a fundamental thesis for us as an organization is it's your data. When I say yours, it's the customers. It's not ours. We're the steward to protect it. We're the steward to give you the best tooling to use it. And we're the steward to give you the best integrations and partners to work with. But at the end of the day, you should work with the partners that are best for your business. And that's what we believe is needed and what's missing in so much of legal technology today.
It's so crazy how a lot of times on, I don't know, Facebook groups, whatever, like the lawyers are talking, are like, what's the best case manager software? What's the best CRM? And they're like wanting someone to give them this magic answer. And it's like, it depends, like a typical lawyer answer, right? Because it's a lot of, well, what's your your practice, and how techie are you? How paperless are you? And do you have a lot of, how do you work and how do you want to work? And there's so much to it, to that. So that's why even when people ask me, like, I get asked this question a lot, and especially more in like immigration, but all practice areas. But it's like I have to push back the question to them and get to know them. But you're so right. There isn't one size fits all for every firm. And that's why there's so much business in this space. There's so many players in this ecosystem.
And that's why it's so important to have that central core system that is designed to do those integrations, to give the flexibility. Because the other thing that I always remind people of is go back and think 10 years ago and some of the technology that you can't believe didn't exist 10 years ago, and it does today. And, that's, as you think back, even, gosh, 15, 20 years ago, it's archaic, some of the things we were doing versus what we can do today.
Yeah.
And so one of the other most important parts is you don't know what's going to be great for your firm 2 years from now, 3 years from now. But what you do know is that you need a central repository where you store your core data that is designed to integrate with who you want to, that lets you be in control. And one of the sentences we always say is we don't accept integration, we expect it. We expect our customers to do multiple integrations with multiple products that are best for them. And when you create that philosophy, that's where you open up the door to look at lots of great solutions. And many of our customers work with 3 or 4 or 5 products. We're the core, we're the central hub, and we make it seamless for them to do that. But it's not about the product. It's about a philosophy. And part of that philosophy, like I mentioned, is also how do you bring the workflow into that so that when you are using some of these great add-on products or partner products, that you're managing that change management and that workflow to be really simple and efficient for your users.
One statistic, I don't know if you're going to remember it because I'm calling it getting you off guard, but you mentioned something about Salesforce and how many integrations one of their users, and it just seemed mind-boggling because I mean, I don't use Salesforce, but I know companies who do, and I'm relatively familiar with it. Some people build their case management software platforms based off of it. But what was the statistic? And because you basically were showing that the opposite of the walled garden concept of the pro integration.
So, and I'm going off memory here also, and I did have the references on that presentation when I was presenting it, but there were two different articles I found that gave competing information. One said that the average Salesforce customer has 10 integrated applications, and one said 75. And I said, so let's go somewhere in the middle. So even say it's 25 or 30. It's a big number. And it shows the power of an ecosystem where you separate the fact of saying it's not about walling it off, it's about becoming the connective hub. It's about becoming the way to bring all of these great technologies together. And that's what we hear from so many people in the market. It's not about our product or any other product. It's about, I want the best products to solve these certain problems for my organization. And sometimes one product can solve 5 of the problems. Sometimes a product can solve 1. That's okay. Let's just make it as easy to use for the user, whether that solution is solving 1 thing or 10 things. Let's make them all integrated and effective so that you're in control to do it. And one of the other advantages it typically offers is cost competitiveness. When firms who are doing one thing's very specialized, they can often be more cost competitive and more cost effective because all of their resources are going to making that the best solution possible. And so we have seen a lot of organizations that have been able to give the products they need at the right price point once they get away from being in a walled off garden environment.
That was I think about TLTF that I had never heard the concept of point solution. And it's like I'm living in this space, but I hadn't used that word. But like that's a program or vendor or a software, I guess, that has one main use, and people just like love it, and they're like don't want to get rid of it because it does that one thing like really well. Basically.
It's all about hyper focus. And those point solutions, when you look at the legal tech market, there's a lot of money coming into the market. There's a lot of private equity, a lot of venture capital. It's incredible. But when you look at some of these products that are doing just 1 or 2 things and they've raised a lot of money, they're able to really focus on being incredibly good at those 1 or 2 things instead of being good or okay at them. And for some businesses, yeah, is what they need. But for businesses of scale, and that's a big thing for us, is we work mostly with larger businesses. And so a lot of what I'll say today is not meant sometimes for some things may not be as relevant for firms that are a little bit smaller, not to say it's not equally important. And we love working with firms of all sizes. But as you start to get to thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of active cases, some of those point solutions that can be very good at things can be the difference of hundreds or thousands of hours of human labor, and can be the difference of very meaningful levels of effort. And that having those very pointed solutions that are investing all of their time and resources at being incredibly good at that one thing can really give you a different output than something that it's just a feature within the output.
Um, One of the things, yeah, when I was giving your intro, the hyper automation, the systematic scaling, and scaling sounds so awesome, because you're like, ooh, I'm increasing my, my ROI. We're building a system, but like you're saying that you target more larger firms than maybe smaller. But what are some of the things that regardless of size, or feel free to differentiate between smaller and larger, that firms need to be considering when they're wanting to scale their
Yeah.
operations and have that hyper automation?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And especially as we get to that larger scaling perspective, one of the big things is that, again, not every answer I'm going to give is pertinent to everybody because every business is different and every business operates differently. But I'll give you one good example. We started talking about workflow. And as you get into an organization that might be 50, 100, 300, 500 people, how you run the workflow of a case is different typically than when you might be, say, a 3-person or 5-person firm. And part of that is because let's take an example of typically as firms are more at that smaller size of headcount, doesn't mean their complexity isn't there, but in this exact use case, you might have a paralegal that's assigned to an attorney. And typically the paralegal task goes to that paralegal. So Ruby's paralegal, Matt, would get all of Ruby's tasks. I'd be a really bad paralegal, Ruby, so don't hire.
Okay, I won't.
But as you get to a firm where you might have 50 or 75 paralegals, you may want to get your workflow to stop being person-to-person assignment and start to go to more group-based assignment or role-based assignment, where you're actually tracking efficiency, where you're looking at certain tasks Matt does really well as a paralegal, but some he's actually pretty bad at. And we don't want him to be doing those tasks. We want those tasks to go to these different people because we're getting more throughput. And the complexity of doing task routing, task measurement, task performance, understanding that in a law firm, you are completing thousands of tasks sometimes for a single case. It's a huge part of what you do. Tasks might be doing a case management follow-up. Tasks might be doing an intake call, whatever it might be. But it moves from being a workflow at scale of just being assign that to my paralegal, assign that to my legal assistant, to I have 75 people who can do it. Who is best to do it? How do I get the most efficiency out of my team?
This episode is sponsored by Candle AI, the legal email assistant that helps legal teams spend less time on client emails. You heard me right, spending less time on emails. Candle AI works with both Gmail and Outlook, so you don't have to learn a new tool. And then it connects with popular case management systems like Clio, Filevine, INSSoom, and more to come. It instantly shows you your case and the client details the moment you open a client email and right inside your inbox. And then that means less context switching and time spent jumping to different tabs to figure out what you need to respond. Candle can also draft context-aware responses to client emails and makes it easy to create, edit, and manage your email templates. If you want to save time and take back control of your inbox, check out Candle AI. I highly suggest it.
I'll tell you, we had a client who we did an exercise with where we tracked all of their task efficiency for a period of time when they used the more, let's call it legacy model, that more assigned to a person. Okay, then we moved them to a model with the exact same number of employees, the exact same resources, no new people, but we moved them to a model where we did group-based distribution, where work was able to be tracked, not talking Big Brother, and where we were able to do task assignment based on criteria other than just your so-and-so's paralegal or your so-and-so's, or we could do it by skill, or we could do it by what are you most efficient at, where we could automatically track if you're logged in or not so that we didn't have to reassign tasks if you were on PTO. And that firm, the week after they went live, completed over 30% more tasks with the exact same headcount.
Wow.
That shows how by doing proper distribution and thinking about the problem differently and realizing that scale means you sometimes have to take the same outcome and get to it differently to get the greater efficiency in that outcome. We were able to dramatically increase what they were able to do. And those are just examples of scaling. I'll give you one more, Ruby, which is as you start thinking about hyperscaling, that's where you do start to come into that automation component and looking at what are the things that people are doing over and over, and where are those items that we can automate without losing effectiveness, without, risking the potential of creating issues. And a big part of that, again, comes down to not being a walled off garden, because automations only work as well as having access to the data to automate and to integrate to the systems. So as you start to scale, one of the only ways that you're going to start to see the true effectiveness of bringing automation into your business is ensuring that you're on platforms and systems that let you integrate, that let you work with those other partners that bring you that efficiency, or you're creating a foundation that isn't going to scale with you.
I think what you said about the group-based versus the legacy assignment versus the legacy, I think about what size do you see firms capable of making that switch, or you suggest it to them?
Yeah, it's a great question. We tend to see firms really starting at between 30 and 50 users. So it's usually around 30 to 50. Most of our clients are 50 and above. I believe our smallest using our product for that is about 25. And they're a very tech forward firm who's very focused on driving efficiency. But that 30, 40, 50 user firm is where we typically start to see. Now, I would argue a firm of 2 users should be focused on ensuring they have access to their data, they can integrate when they want to, that they're in control of who they want to work with. But when it comes to some of the workflow management, some of the automation work, you tend to see more of that as firms get a little bit larger in headcount, is where we really see it. And then bringing that together with how do you drive workflow to manage the change management. That is, I'm going to keep saying it because it's one of the things not enough firms really think about. It's how much time they spend every day realizing people aren't following the same SOP, realizing they may not even have SOPs, realizing that they're trying to retrain with attrition because they're not systemically brought workflow into their applications. It's something that sits outside of the applications, and that is what creates a lot of the headache.
Wait, what do you mean by that? Can you elaborate on that last sentence about it, or it's outside of your applications?
So I'm going to make up a number, but I'm going to be directionally accurate. I bet there's been 100 firms in the last year who have told me, we have SOPs. And I said, great. How do you enforce them? We send people Word documents or PDFs. That's outside of the systems they're working in. And so you're hoping those users read them, remember them, and then there's trust. Yeah, it's a hope and pray model that, gosh, I hope people do this. And then people are baffled. Not really, but they jokingly are baffled and they go, oh yeah, I guess that person isn't doing it, or this person isn't doing it, or this isn't being followed.
Yeah.
And it's because most systems in legal tech didn't actually have workflow built into the product. They didn't give you a full workflow engine to enforce it, to drive data security and data governance, to drive workflow processes and to measure it. And measuring simply means, in most cases, what are we doing that could be made more efficient? It's not about how do we manage the people. It's more about, wow, what we've asked the team members to do, was it logical now that we can see the data? How do we fix it to make it more logical? So I'll give you one example of that. Within our workflow engine, when you assign a task to a user or group and the user takes the task, it tracks what they do with that task. So it's not just did they complete it or not complete it, it's how long did they spend in it? Did they snooze it? So in most systems, you just mark it completed or not completed. With a workflow system, the user takes a task and maybe the task is to call somebody. If they call them and they don't get it, they can then snooze the task and say, do it again tomorrow and give a reason for why. And we had a customer who realized that they were making 60 to 70% of all calls on one task were getting snoozed because they were calling too early and the person didn't have the data yet. But they were doing that hundreds to thousands of times a month and it was completely inefficient. But because they could now track it, they realized, why don't we add a few days of delay before we issue that task? Now we know why. In a system where the workflow isn't built in truly, all you see is task and it was completed. You don't know what happened in between because it's usually just a comment section and you can't parse those comments effectively. So when I say bringing the workflow in, the amount of times that data shows a firm, wow, this workflow process we came up with, it's not working. But now I have the data to fix it and I have the data to be able to modify it. And because it's built into the system, in that example, that customer didn't have to send anything new out to their users. They didn't have to say, here's an updated SOP. The task just didn't appear until 3 days later. So now the user is being dictated what to do from a process perspective by the system instead of the user having to try to figure it out themselves.
I think when I talk to a lot of firms that are more like a smaller size, the collection of data is one of the biggest problems they don't realize they have, because they have data everywhere, but they're not synchronizing it or putting it in one place to see the big picture or making an effort to use it in some way. And maybe living in the 50 and above space, you forget or you don't know what that's like. But the small and solos, like they're really challenged. And there's so like even when you're saying all these beautiful examples of like having the data and then you can tweak and make edits, I love it. But like I think a lot of small solos firms, their issue is just even having the data in the first place or some clean systems. And so going to what we were talking about, like if you do have multiple programs that connect with each other, how do you overcome the fact that there's data sitting in multiple places? Do you have any suggestions for maybe that small mid-sized firm to sort of collect the data and have sort of a global view?
No, you're 100% correct. And I'm going to change your question a little bit, Ruby, because I think it's relevant for everybody. I think it's not just for, I don't think it's just for firms of smaller size. I think it's for everybody. I think your question's important. And I completely agree it's important for firms of smaller size and headcount, because like you said, a lot of times they don't necessarily have the people whose job it is to look at the data, to aggregate the data, to work on the data. They're in court, they're on the phone with customers, they're focused on running their business. And that's critical because that's what they're great at. And so one of the answers I'm going to keep coming back to is it all stems from having case management platforms, core platforms that are designed for that integration, where those third parties are actually able to read the data directly from that case management system, push the data in directly so that that does become your central repository. The majority of those third parties, you should not be logging into their systems. Most of the third parties in those point solutions don't want you logging into their solutions. They want to bring that into a single cohesive interface, into a single platform that gives the best customer experience, where the data can live in one system, where you can report on one system, where you can run automations and workflows and do all of that. So, and that works whether you're 50 people or 3 people. It doesn't matter. But I think it is as important or more important for the smaller firms so that they do know they have one source of truth and they can start to become a data-driven business, where a lot of them right now, the data is something they have, but it's not necessarily driving how they operate their business. And that's not a criticism. It's a reality of it's hard when it's across a lot of systems, and it becomes very difficult to, with the time in a day, to do that.
In a very practical sense, what would you tell a firm that's more of a small head count or team size to get started in taking control of their data?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. I think one would be look at the data that you actually need. There are a lot of firms who track a lot of pieces of data that they never actually use. And when you're tracking, we went into one customer recently because I actually saw it, and they had 3,200 fields of data that they were tracking on projects. 3,200. Our answer was, we could sit here and probably just point at fields and tell us the last time you used these. You probably can't. But when you have 3,200, it's overwhelming. Now, that was an extreme example. But let's even say you have 800 or 500, which a lot of firms do. Are you using those fields? It becomes very hard to stay motivated to keep the data up to date, to figure out how to use it, to integrate with it when there's so much of it. More isn't always better. Sometimes it is. And there are some use cases you have to have it. But just having more isn't always better, because it can become so difficult to try to manage that then you just don't do it at all. So my first thing that I would say is, do you need it? And if the answer is no, get rid of it, because chances are it's actually creating problems for you.
There's something you were talking about earlier about if your law firm was a computer, and what is one bug in the operating system that you see most owners ignoring while they try to grow? Did we already cover that? Or
We did not.
Okay, I'm curious what the bug is.
Yeah, I think, again, and I've talked about it a little bit, and I'm going to give it to you in like 2 bugs, but I think one of them, and probably the biggest, is not using the data to run their business. I think that is the biggest. Most use their systems to complete tasks, and most use their systems to store things like documents that they need to be able to pull back up in the future. But it's not being used to drive business decisions. And teaching and showing that when you remove some of the complexity, when you integrate the systems together, when they're properly connected, where it's no additional effort for you, where it's simple. Because I can tell you, the legal tech companies, we want to work together. Most of those add-on products want to make it simple, and they're great products, and they want to make it that you don't even have to think about using them in an integrated environment. When you bring that together and you can start running your business based on data instead of just having the data, it's unbelievable what some of our customers and people we've talked to have been able to do. But I would tell you that very, very many of the firms that we speak to, their bug is their data is not being used to run their business. Their data is being used to run a case. and they're using it for cases. They're not using it to run their business.
And before we were getting started, you told me something that you'd seen as a trend in the last 90 days or so, and I thought that was really fascinating. So what are you seeing? Because you see a lot of different clients at different sizes, and so it must be really fascinating because it sounds like a lot of your clients, your customers are very tech forward. So what are some of the themes you're seeing?
Yeah, no, absolutely. We're seeing a few competing themes depending on the life cycle of where a firm is. But one theme, and the one we were talking about, Ruby, is we're seeing a theme where I've had more than one customer, probably weekly the last few months, say, I want to use AI to do everything in my firm, and use generic, sort of very overarching sentences like that. And it's going to change because I would say a year ago, 6 months ago, there was a lot of conversations that were, I'm intrigued by AI, but I don't even know where to start with it. And now we're starting to see the pendulum go even so far to the other side of, I think I can use it to not replace, but to augment all of these different parts of my business. Everything from intake to, document review to demand generation to everything. And the reality is that AI, and even if you look at the majority of where it is today, it's growing so fast, who knows where it'll be in 18 or 24 months. But the reality is in many cases where it is best is when it is an augmenting tool, to where there are some use cases where it can do it start to finish, but in many cases, it's bringing efficiency to team members, to human team members, not replacing human team members. And it's removing some of the mundane work. And what we've really been seeing is having to take some of our customers and prospects and people we're just talking to and go to, doing all of that is not yet there. And part of where you see that is that, there are customers who are telling me, well, I'm using AI to do this item. I go, well, when you request it via an integration, how long does it take to come back? 3 days. I said, well, if it's taking 3 days, there's clearly some human element still being done. So, because AI doesn't take 3 days to run. So let's just acknowledge that what's happening is that there's both a combination of human and AI that's solving a problem for you, completing an output for you that you want. That's wonderful. But that still involves humans, and humans aren't going to completely disappear. And it's been a really interesting item, and I've not looked in the last, say, 2 years. But one other anecdote I always like to share that's similar is when all of mobile phones and everything came out, and when it went to iPhones and it went to Android, there was a belief that the number of phone calls in America would drastically decrease.
Mm.
The number of phone calls in America has not drastically decreased in the last 20 years. It's not changed some of those human. People still sometimes want to talk to a human. People still want to have some of those interactions. And it's part of what, in some cases, can actually differentiate a firm, is to use automations, use AI to help run a more efficient business, to drive cost savings, to be able to be more effective to the customer, but to not lose focus on the fact that human behavior, and candidly, just phone statistics have shown, people still like to pick up the phone in certain use cases and talk to somebody. Not in all, but in some cases, and that can't be completely eliminated.
I think that's a really good point because you're right. Like when you mentioned that some of your customers are trying to sort of eliminate humans in as much as possible, and I've heard a lot of people like there's like this bragging thing, like I can do this with like no staff, or like my bots are running the bots or managing the bots or something like that. But you're right. Like who's still going to oversee some of those things, and the human interaction, like the humans still aren't used to all of the bot and AI interaction. And like even in my office, I think it's a good example because we're dealing with different generations of clients. We're different with different nationalities and culture and different levels of anxiety. And so there's just we still have in-person consults for that particular reason, even though some firms have completely gotten rid of that. But I still offer it because I feel like it helps certain people with their trust.
And let me I give this example to a client the other day. Many, and as people hopefully this will resonate with them, is as you think about in your own personal life, whether it's an airline you fly on a lot and you get status at the airline. I'm a United flyer, so you're working to get to 1K status. what's one of the, and with credit cards, whether you're a Chase customer, an American Express Platinum or Black customer, most people, as they get to those statuses and you ask them, what's one of the reasons you want that status? What's one of the things they give you? It's the ability to get to a human and talk to them very fast and not wait in line. It's the human interaction that you actually want. What's the number one thing with United 1K? You call the 1K number and they answer within a few rings. They help you and they get it done. What's one of the biggest things with American Express Platinum and Black? It's the human concierge. It's the answer the phone almost instantly. It's greet you by name. So the funny part is that a lot of people, many of which who are running firms who have those advantages, they're the ones who are building up, stability, point status with these different organizations. And one of the big outcomes, and there's other benefits to it, don't get me wrong.
Right.
One of the big ones with your people, it's I can call the 1K line and get an immediate answer. That's a benefit. It's not I can use a chat or I can get an immediate human. So, and the amount of phone calls in America shows that phone calls are still relevant. Human interaction is still relevant. And that's why we are big believers that AI can transform legal. I'm not a naysayer to AI. I'm a believer that it's how do you blend it together where you don't lose the human touch, which is what so many people are looking for, and that you combine AI for efficiency, but pair it with how do you still provide the human component that data still shows people are looking for.
Oh yeah. I love that. And I think we've had a lot of talks about AI on the podcast and a handful about like not losing touch with the human element and the change management, but there are different versions of this conversation and today talking a lot about the scaling and automation. I think it's very valuable because we maybe you are a smaller firm and you're aspiring to be larger and to be able to scale. And I think these are some of the things that you're moving up and up in your journey. You might not know the solutions to the problems because you have new types of problems, but I think one of the key themes that you've said was just having your data, having the right type of data that you can use to make decisions and improve your systems to help you scale and automate as much as you possibly can.
Yeah, I think you said it a lot faster than me.
I'm getting trained to summarize what we say. I don't know. So many podcasts already.
Are you feeling overwhelmed by all the different things you have to do to run a law firm? Well, you're not alone. So many law firm owners are in the same boat. That's where Staffy steps in. More than 90 firms, just like
well, it's time to do the fun rapid fun fact questions, Matt. So I don't know where the time went, but would you consider your superpower?
So, and these were good questions. I'm glad you gave them to me ahead so I could think for a minute about them. I think mine is ability to stay calm in chaos. I think a lot of times people struggle to do that, and it's something I thrive on, and something for very weird reasons I enjoy.
Awesome. What is a favorite book or podcast you highly recommend?
So one that I recently read was Leaders Eat Last by Simon Sinek.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And I did think that there was some very interesting, I tend to read more business books or the news, less fiction, but that was one that I did really enjoy. And I think it's very relevant in my topic about the human component, because so much of it is around how to build a culture, how to be a leader that helps build the culture that team members will want to be part of.
I've heard that title. I probably should just read it. And I think I have one of his other books. Is it The Power of Why? Or he's known for another one, I think.
Yes, I started to watch him after one of his early TED Talks that I really liked. And I'm going to remember the name of that in a moment. But this one was recommended to me by another business leader, so I read it recently.
Awesome. What is a habit that you believe contributes to your success?
I think a lot of times for entrepreneurs, and it was hard for me when I was early in my entrepreneurial career, is pivoting and making changes when needed. I think too often it's easy to get stuck with what you've been doing and realizing as things change, you need to change. And I think over the last, especially in Neostella's business, our willingness to pivot from where we started in hyperautomation, not in legal, to seeing the opportunity in legal and taking the lessons from that to bring it into the legal industry is what has allowed us to be very successful.
Well, it sounds like you've really grown really quickly in a small period of time, even though you started right before the pandemic. So you've gone through a lot of changes in just a short period of time. What is a board game? This is one of my favorite questions, but what is your favorite board game or card game?
So recently played a new one called Hitster that really enjoyed. It is where they play 10 seconds of a song, and it's a game that involves trying to match up which year that song came out. It's only fun if you're like over 40, because otherwise you don't know half the songs. But it was actually a lot of fun. My wife and I played it with some friends and realized I didn't know half of them, but it was sort of a fun play of a board game along with music.
It's called Hit, Stir,
Stir.
and okay. Okay. Yeah, it's hard to find games that like different generations, and even when my family like multiple languages can speak when I get all my family together. But yeah, but it's fun when you can find a game that you can truly enjoy. But thanks for the caveat of the age component.
Yeah, I don't know if my kids would have known half of the songs, but it was fun.
Well, it's sort of like when at New Year's and they have all these people playing, the artists, and I'm like, I don't even know who those people are, and like I'm not even that old.
Actually, when we played it on New Year's Eve with some neighbors.
You're like, you guys go listen to that and we'll do our thing over here.
Exactly.
Matt, how can people find you and stay connected?
Yeah, would love to stay connected, would love to continue discussions with anybody. So obviously on LinkedIn, which I know, Ruby, I shared my LinkedIn with you, but also neostella.com is our site. And then my email is just matt@neostella.com. Very easy.
Awesome. Well, I really enjoyed our conversation. I'm glad that we met in person at TLTF. And, I think it's fascinating. I mean, I probably could have listened more to a lot of your, I wouldn't say war stories, but a lot of these stories that you shared of what you've seen and heard. And I mean, I find those really fascinating as well. And just, I think the value of the data and using it to your advantage with the KPIs and adjusting your systems. There's just so much to manage when we're running law firms. So I'm glad we could have this conversation today. Well, thanks everyone for listening. We've got some exciting news later in the year with the ABA Tech Show in late March in Chicago, and a retreat that we're going to be hosting in the Denver, Colorado area in August of 2026. So stay tuned, find out more with our newsletter and our website, and we'll see you next time. Take care. Thank you for tuning in to Power Up Your Practice. I'm Ruby Powers, and it's been a pleasure sharing this time with you. We love your reviews, so if you enjoyed today's episode, please leave us one and share this podcast with someone else so that they can know what you've been learning on our show. And make sure to check out the Power Up Your Practice book. It's available in paperback and Kindle on Amazon. It's packed with 25 chapters of strategies to grow and streamline your firm. And we also have the free Power Hub community on School to keep the conversation going in between the episodes. So make sure to keep powering up your practice, and we'll see you next time.